The blood soaked through her deerskin dress in 3 places when Henry Bancroft first saw her lying face down in the ravine. Her long black hair spread across the dry earth like a dark river. He had been tracking a wounded buck for the better part of the morning, but the moment he spotted the woman's still form between the rocks and scrub brush, everything else ceased to matter. Henry dismounted from his horse in one fluid motion, his boots hitting the ground hard as he scrambled down the slope toward her, sending loose stones cascading ahead of him. She was Apache. That much was clear from her clothing and the traditional beadwork on her moccasins. The year was 1878, and this part of Nebraska Territory had seen its share of conflict between settlers and native peoples. But Henry had never been the kind of man who saw enemies where there were only human beings. He dropped to his knees beside her and gently turned her onto her back, his heart hammering as he searched for signs of life. Her face was beautiful even in its pallor, with high cheekbones and full lips that were slightly parted. She could not have been more than 22 or 23 years old, he guessed, maybe a year or two younger than his own 25 years. A thin line of blood had dried at the corner of her mouth. Henry pressed 2 fingers to her throat and nearly shouted with relief when he felt a pulse, faint but steady. The wounds were serious. A bullet had grazed her left shoulder, another had passed through her side, and the third injury appeared to be from a knife across her right thigh. Her breathing was shallow and rapid. Henry knew if he did not get her help soon, she would die out here in this lonely ravine miles from anywhere. He shed his coat and wrapped it around her carefully, then lifted her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, he thought, or perhaps it was simply the adrenaline coursing through his veins that made her seem light as air. His horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Chester, stood waiting patiently at the top of the ravine. Henry climbed with the woman cradled against his chest, his boots finding purchase in the loose soil through sheer determination. Once he reached level ground, he had to make a decision. Fort Kearney was still 2 days' ride south, too far for her condition. His own homestead was 4 hours west, a small ranch house he had built himself over the past 3 years. It was isolated and rough, but it had a roof and walls and a fireplace, and more importantly, he had medical supplies there. His mother had been a nurse before she died, and she had taught him the basics of treating wounds and setting bones. Henry secured the unconscious woman on Chester's back and climbed up behind her, holding her steady against his chest as he turned the horse westward. Every minute counted now. He could feel her warmth through his shirt, could feel each labored breath she took. Something had shifted in his chest the moment he saw her, something he could not name but felt deep in his bones. The sun was high and merciless as they rode. Henry kept Chester at a steady but careful pace, not wanting to jar the woman's injuries. He found himself talking to her as they traveled, though she gave no sign of hearing. "You are going to be all right," he said quietly. "I promise you that. Whatever happened to you, whoever did this, you are safe now. My name is Henry Bancroft. I have a place not far from here. I can help you if you will let me." The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of sage and dust. Henry adjusted his hold on the woman, one arm wrapped securely around her waist. Her head lolled against his shoulder, and he could see now that there were smaller cuts and bruises on her arms and hands, as though she had fought hard against her attackers. Rage flared in his chest at the thought, but he pushed it down. Anger would not help her now. Only steady hands and clear thinking would do that. By the time his homestead came into view, the sun had moved significantly across the sky. The small ranch house sat in a valley between 2 low hills, with a barn and corral off to one side. Henry had never been so grateful to see the place. He rode directly up to the house and dismounted, then carefully lifted the woman down and carried her inside. The interior was simple but clean, with a large main room that served as both kitchen and living area, and a single bedroom off to the side. Henry laid her on his bed, the only bed in the house, and immediately set about building up the fire in the stone fireplace. He would need hot water, clean cloth, and his mother's old medical kit. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, gathering supplies and setting a large pot of water to boil. Then he returned to the bedroom and began the careful work of cutting away the woman's blood-stained dress. He tried to maintain her modesty as best he could, covering her with a sheet while he worked, but the wounds needed to be cleaned and treated. The bullet wound in her shoulder was not too deep, the projectile having passed through the muscle without striking bone. The one in her side was more concerning, but it too appeared to have missed anything vital. The knife wound on her thigh was long but shallow. Henry cleaned each injury methodically, using the hot water and clean cloth to remove dried blood and dirt. The woman stirred several times during his ministrations, soft sounds of pain escaping her lips, but she did not wake. Once the wounds were clean, Henry applied a poultice his mother had taught him to make from herbs he kept dried in his cupboard. Then he bandaged each injury carefully, wrapping strips of clean linen around her shoulder, her torso, and her thigh. When he was finally finished, he pulled the quilt up to her chin and sat back, exhausted. She looked peaceful now, her breathing easier than it had been. Henry studied her face in the lamplight, wondering who she was and what had happened to her. Apache raiding parties rarely came this far north anymore, not since the treaties had been signed. But tensions still ran high in some places, and there were men on both sides who refused to let old hatreds die. He made himself coffee and sat in the chair beside the bed, determined to keep watch through the night. If fever set in, he would need to be ready. Every hour he checked her pulse and her temperature, relieved each time to find both steady. Dawn was breaking when she finally opened her eyes. Henry had dozed off in the chair, his head tilted back against the wall, but some instinct made him wake. He found himself looking directly into her gaze, and for a moment neither of them moved. Her eyes were dark brown, almost black, and filled with a mixture of fear and confusion. She tried to sit up, but pain lanced through her and she gasped, falling back against the pillows. "Easy," Henry said, leaning forward. "You are hurt. You need to stay still." She stared at him, and he could see her mind working, trying to make sense of where she was and who he was. Her hand moved beneath the quilt, and he realized she was checking to see if she was clothed. When she felt the bandages and the sheet covering her, some of the fear in her eyes eased, but only slightly. "I found you yesterday in a ravine," Henry said, speaking slowly and clearly. "You were shot and cut. I brought you here to help you. This is my home. You are safe." She watched him without speaking, and he wondered if she understood English. Many Apache people did, especially those who had spent time near the forts or trading posts, but he could not be certain. "You understand me?" he asked gently. She nodded once, a small movement that clearly cost her. Her lips moved, and he leaned closer to hear. "Water," she whispered, her voice rough and cracked. "Of course." Henry stood quickly and poured water from a pitcher into a tin cup. He helped her raise her head slightly and held the cup to her lips, letting her drink slowly. She took several small sips before turning her head away, and he set the cup aside. "What is your name?" he asked. She was silent for so long that he thought she might not answer. Then, so quietly he almost missed it, she said, "Ileana." It was not a traditional Apache name, and he wondered at that, but he simply nodded. "Ileana. That is a beautiful name. I am Henry." "Henry," she repeated, testing the sound of it. Then her eyes closed again, and she drifted back into sleep. Over the next 3 days, Henry tended to her with the devotion of a man possessed. He changed her bandages twice daily, prepared simple broths and tried to get her to eat, and kept the fire burning through the cold spring nights. Ileana slept most of the time, waking only for brief periods to drink water or take a few spoonfuls of broth. The fever he had been dreading finally came on the second night, and Henry spent hours bathing her forehead and arms with cool water, murmuring reassurances he was not sure she could hear. When the fever finally broke just before dawn on the third day, Henry slumped in his chair and felt tears of relief sting his eyes. He had not realized how much he needed her to live until that moment, how much the thought of her dying in his bed had terrified him. It made no sense. He did not know this woman. She was a stranger, someone from a world entirely different from his own. And yet, from the moment he had found her in that ravine, something had connected them, some invisible thread he could not explain. On the fourth day, Ileana woke with clear eyes and managed to eat half a bowl of stew Henry had made from salt pork and vegetables. She watched him move around the room, her expression unreadable, but she did not seem afraid anymore. "You should be in Fort Kearney," she said suddenly, her voice stronger than it had been. "Why are you here?" Henry looked up from the pot he was stirring. "I came out here 3 years ago, bought this land and built this house with my own hands. I raise cattle, though I only have about 30 head right now. Someday I hope to expand. You live alone?" "Yes. My parents died 5 years ago back in Pennsylvania, cholera. I had a sister, but she married and moved to California. It is just me now." Ileana nodded slowly, absorbing this information. "You take a risk helping me. If soldiers come, if anyone comes, they will ask questions." "Let them ask," Henry said firmly. "I am not going to apologize for helping someone who needed help." Something flickered in her eyes, an emotion he could not quite name. "You do not understand. My people and your people are at war." "No," Henry said, setting down his spoon and walking over to sit in the chair beside the bed. "Some people are at war, but not you and me. You have done nothing to me, and I have done nothing to you. All I see is a woman who was hurt and needed help. That is all that matters." Ileana looked away, staring at the rough wooden ceiling. "I was with my family," she said after a long silence. "We were traveling to join others of our band. There were 6 of us. My father, my mother, my 2 younger brothers, my grandmother, and me. We were careful, staying off the main trails, but they found us anyway." "Who found you?" Henry asked, though he dreaded the answer. "White men, 4 of them, maybe 5. They had rifles and whiskey. They were looking for Apache to kill, said we did not belong on this land anymore, that we should go back to the reservations or die. My father tried to talk to them, to tell them we meant no harm, but they shot him first." Her voice remained steady, but Henry could see the pain in her eyes. "Then they shot my mother when she screamed. My grandmother tried to shield my brothers, but they shot her too. One of the men, he came at me with a knife. I fought him, managed to cut him with his own blade, but there were too many. They shot me and I fell. I think they thought I was dead because they left. When I woke up, everyone was gone." "Gone," Henry said carefully. "Dead, all of them dead. I tried to bury them, but I was too weak, too hurt. I managed to cover them with rocks and brush to say the prayers for them. Then I started walking. I do not remember much after that. I just walked until I could not walk anymore." Henry felt sick. The casual brutality of it, the senseless murder of an entire family simply for existing, made him want to put his fist through the wall, but he kept his voice calm and gentle. "I am so sorry, Ileana. No one should have to endure that. No one." She turned her head to look at him, and he saw tears gleaming in her eyes, though they did not fall. "Why do you care? You do not know me. You do not know my people." "I do not need to know anything more than what I see right in front of me," Henry said. You are a person who has suffered a terrible loss and who deserves compassion. That is enough." Ileana studied his face for a long moment, as though searching for deception or hidden motives. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she finally nodded and closed her eyes again. As the days passed and Ileana grew stronger, she began to move around the house more, though Henry insisted she take things slowly. Her wounds were healing well, but they were still tender, and he worried about her pushing herself too hard. She was stubborn, though, and independent, unused to relying on anyone else for her needs. "You do not have to do that," Henry said one morning when he found her trying to wash dishes in the basin, her face tight with pain from the effort. "I can help," she insisted. "You have done so much for me. The least I can do is wash a few dishes." "You can help by resting and healing," Henry countered, gently taking the dish from her hands. "There will be plenty of time for washing dishes later." She looked up at him, and he was struck again by how beautiful she was, how the morning light caught the curve of her cheek and the darkness of her eyes. He had to force himself to look away, to focus on the simple task of washing the dishes himself. But it was becoming harder and harder to ignore what was happening in his heart. Every time Ileana smiled, every time she laughed at something he said or shared a story from her childhood, Henry felt himself falling deeper. He had never experienced anything like this before. There had been girls back in Pennsylvania. A few he had courted in a half-hearted way, but nothing that had ever felt like this, like his entire world had shifted on its axis. He tried to tell himself it was just because he had saved her life, that these feelings would fade once she was well and able to leave. But he knew, deep down, that he was lying to himself. This was something else entirely, something profound and terrifying and wonderful all at once. Ileana seemed to be grappling with her own complicated emotions. Henry caught her watching him sometimes when she thought he was not looking, an expression on her face that he could not quite read. She would help him with small tasks around the house despite his protests, and in the evenings they would sit by the fire and talk for hours. She told him about her childhood, about learning to ride horses before she could properly walk, about helping her mother gather herbs and roots in the mountains. She told him about the stories her grandmother used to tell, ancient tales of coyote and raven, of monsters and heroes. Her people had been moving between camps for generations, following the buffalo and the seasons, living in harmony with the land. "Everything is changing now," she said one evening, staring into the fire. "The buffalo are nearly gone. The land we once traveled freely is fenced and claimed. Our people are pushed onto smaller and smaller pieces of earth, told we must farm like white men, told we must give up our ways. Some resist, some fight, others accept because they have no choice. My family, we were trying to find a middle path. We wanted to live as we always had, but we were not raiding or making war. We just wanted to be left in peace. And that is all anyone should want," Henry said. "The right to live in peace." "The world does not work that way," Ileana said bitterly. "Not for my people, maybe not for anyone." Henry wanted to argue, to tell her that things could be different, but he knew she was right. The world was often cruel and unjust, especially to those who were different or who stood in the way of someone else's ambitions. 2 weeks after Henry had found her, Ileana was able to walk to the barn with him to see the horses. She moved stiffly, favoring her injured side, but her color was good and her eyes were bright. She had been wearing one of Henry's old shirts and a pair of trousers he had altered to fit her, since her own clothing had been ruined. The sight of her in his clothes did strange things to his heart. "You have good horses," she said, running her hand along Chester's neck. The bay gelding snorted softly and leaned into her touch. "Chester has been with me since I came out here," Henry said. He is a steady one, never spooked, never balked. I owe him a lot. He likes you, Ileana observed. Animals know when a person has a good heart. Is that so? Henry said, trying to keep his tone light. What does your heart tell you about me? Ileana turned to look at him, her hand still on Chester's neck. It tells me you are a good man, Henry Bancroft. Better than most I have known, white or Apache. It tells me I am lucky you found me that day. I am the lucky one, Henry said quietly. Their eyes met and held, and the air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken words. Henry wanted to reach out to touch her hand, to tell her everything he had been feeling, but he held himself back. She had been through so much, lost everything. The last thing she needed was him pushing his feelings on her, but Ileana took a step closer and then another until she was standing directly in front of him. Henry, she said softly. Yes, thank you for everything. For saving me, for taking care of me, for treating me with kindness when you had no reason to. I had every reason, Henry said, his voice rough with emotion. You are a person who needed help. That is reason enough. Is that all I am to you? She asked, and there was something vulnerable in her voice, something that made his heart clench. A person who needed help. Henry swallowed hard. This was the moment. He could deflect, could keep things safe and simple, or he could tell her the truth. No, he said finally. You are more than that, so much more. What am I, then? You are the woman I think about every moment of every day, Henry said, the words tumbling out now. You are the reason I wake up with hope and go to bed with peace. You are the first person who has made me feel like this house is a home instead of just four walls and a roof. I know it makes no sense. I know we barely know each other. But Ileana, from the moment I found you in that ravine, something changed in me. I cannot explain it. I just know that the thought of you leaving, of never seeing you again, feels like losing something essential. Ileana reached up and placed her palm against his cheek, her touch warm and gentle. It does not make no sense, she said. I feel it too, this connection between us. I did not want to feel it. I told myself it was just gratitude, that once I was healed I would leave and forget. But I cannot forget, Henry. I do not want to forget. Henry turned his face into her palm, closing his eyes. What are we going to do? He whispered. I do not know, Ileana admitted. The world will not make this easy for us. Your people and my people, the history between us, the hatred. There will be those who do not understand, who will try to keep us apart. I do not care about them, Henry said fiercely. I only care about you. I care about you too, Ileana said. More than I thought possible. But Henry, you must understand what you would be taking on. If I stay, if we are together, there will be consequences. People will judge you. They may shun you or worse. Let them, Henry said, opening his eyes to look directly into hers. I have never been one to live my life according to what others think I should do. If they have a problem with who I love, that is their burden to carry, not mine. Love, Ileana repeated, and a small smile tugged at her lips. You love me. Henry felt his face flush, but he did not look away. Yes, I know it is too soon. I know I should probably wait before saying such things. But yes, I love you, Ileana. I think I have loved you since I first saw you lying in that ravine, since the moment I realized you were alive. Ileana leaned forward and kissed him then, soft and tentative at first, then with more certainty. Henry wrapped his arms around her carefully, mindful of her healing wounds, and kissed her back with all the pent-up emotion of the past 2 weeks. She tasted like the coffee they had shared that morning, like hope and possibility and everything good in the world. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Ileana rested her forehead against his chest, and Henry held her close, marveling at how perfectly she fit in his arms. I love you too, she whispered against his shirt. I did not want to, I tried not to, but I do. "Then that is all that matters," Henry said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "We will figure out the rest together." They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the quiet of the barn while the horses shuffled in their stalls and the spring wind whispered through the cracks in the wood. It felt like a promise, Henry thought, like the beginning of something that would last. The next few weeks were the happiest of Henry's life. Eliana's wounds continued to heal, and as her strength returned, she became a full partner in running the homestead. She had skills he lacked, knowledge of plants and herbs that could be used for medicine or food, an understanding of the land and whether that came from generations of living close to the earth. She taught him how to track animals more efficiently, how to find water in unlikely places, how to read the signs that indicated a storm was coming. In turn, Henry taught her about cattle ranching, about the business side of selling beef and hides, about the tools and techniques he had learned from other ranchers in the area. They worked side by side from dawn until dusk, and in the evenings they would sit by the fire, talking and laughing and stealing kisses when the mood struck them. Henry had never felt so complete. It was as though a piece of himself he had not even known was missing had finally fallen into place. Eliana challenged him, made him think about things from new perspectives, pushed him to be better than he had been. And yet she also accepted him exactly as he was, with all his faults and quirks and rough edges. One evening in late May, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the hills, Henry broached the subject that had been on his mind for days. "Eliana," he said carefully, "have you given any thought to what you want to do? Long term, I mean." She turned to look at him, her expression thoughtful. "What do you mean? I mean about us, about staying here. I do not want to pressure you, and I know you may have other obligations or places you need to be. But if you wanted to stay, if you wanted to make this your home, I would like that very much." "Are you asking me to live with you?" Eliana asked, a hint of amusement in her voice. "I am asking you to marry me," Henry said, and then laughed at the shock on her face. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a short time. But I am sure about this, Eliana. I am sure about you. I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life. I want to build something with you, something lasting. Will you marry me?" Eliana was silent for a long moment, and Henry felt his heart hammering in his chest. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Henry, I will marry you." The relief and joy that flooded through him was almost overwhelming. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her thoroughly, pouring every ounce of love and devotion he felt into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, both were grinning like fools. "We will have to go to Fort Kearny to find someone who can marry us," Henry said. "A preacher or a justice of the peace." "Are you sure you want to do this publicly?" Eliana asked, her smile fading slightly. "Henry, there will be talk. There will be people who disapprove." "I am sure," Henry said firmly. "I will not hide you or hide what we have. You are going to be my wife, and I want the world to know it." They made the journey to Fort Kearny 3 days later. The town had grown since Henry had last visited, with new buildings springing up along the main street and a sense of bustling prosperity in the air. Henry had worried about how people would react to seeing him with Eliana, but he kept his head high and his hand firmly clasped with hers as they walked. There were stares, certainly, and whispers that followed in their wake. A few people gave them openly hostile looks. But there were also those who simply nodded in greeting or went about their business without comment. It was not as bad as it could have been, Henry thought, though he knew that was small comfort. They found the town preacher, a middle-aged man named Reverend Thompson who had a kind face and tired eyes. He listened to their request without interrupting, then sat back in his chair and regarded them both thoughtfully. "You understand this will not be easy," he said finally. A union between a white man and an Apache woman. There are laws in some places against such marriages, though not here, not yet. But laws or no laws, there will be people who object strenuously. I understand, Henry said, but we love each other and we want to be married. Will you perform the ceremony or not? Reverend Thompson looked at Eliana. Is this what you want, young lady? You are here of your own free will. I am, Eliana said clearly. I love Henry and I want to be his wife. The Reverend nodded slowly. Then I will marry you. Love is a gift from God, and I will not be the one to stand in its way. Come back tomorrow afternoon. I will have the paperwork prepared. They spent the night at the small hotel in town, paying for separate rooms to maintain propriety, though Henry would have much preferred to stay with Eliana. The next afternoon, dressed in the best clothes they could manage, they returned to the church. The ceremony was simple but beautiful. Reverend Thompson spoke about love and commitment, about building a life together through good times and bad. When it came time to exchange vows, Henry looked into Eliana's eyes and spoke from his heart. I promise to love you, to honor you, to stand by your side no matter what comes. You are my partner, my equal, my greatest blessing. I will spend every day of my life trying to be worthy of you. Eliana's voice was steady when she spoke her own vows. I promise to love you, to support you, to build a home and a life with you. You saved me when I had nothing left, and you gave me a reason to hope again. I will be faithful to you always, in heart and in deed. Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, and Henry kissed his bride with a joy so profound, it brought tears to his eyes. They signed the marriage certificate, and the Reverend gave them a copy to keep. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together as a married couple. The journey back to the homestead felt different somehow, more significant. They were no longer just two people who had found each other. They were a family now, bound together by law and by love. Henry could not stop smiling, and every time he looked over at Eliana riding beside him, she was smiling too. That night, in the privacy of their home, they consummated their marriage with a tenderness and passion that left them both breathless. Henry was careful of Eliana's still healing wounds, but she assured him she was well enough, that she wanted this as much as he did. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, whispering words of love and making plans for their future. I want to expand the ranch, Henry said, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. Get more cattle, maybe build a bigger barn. I want to build something that will last, something we can pass down to our children someday. Children, Eliana murmured. I like the sound of that. Do you want children? Henry asked, propping himself up on one elbow to look at her. Yes, she said simply. I want children with you, Henry. I want to fill this house with love and laughter. I want to create a family, a new family to replace the one I lost. We will, Henry promised, leaning down to kiss her. We will create something beautiful together. The summer passed in a blur of hard work and stolen moments of intimacy. They expanded the vegetable garden, repaired fences, branded the new calves that had been born in the spring. Eliana proved to be an excellent ranch hand, unafraid of hard work and willing to learn new skills. She also brought her own knowledge and traditions to their life together, teaching Henry about the Apache way of seeing the world, about the importance of living in balance with nature. Not everything was easy. In early July, a group of men from Fort Kearny rode out to the ranch, demanding to speak with Henry. They had heard about his marriage to an Apache woman and wanted to make their displeasure known. Henry faced them down on his own porch, his rifle held loosely but ready. This is my land and that is my wife, he said, his voice hard. What we do here is none of your concern. She is a savage, one of the men spat. You are a traitor to your own kind, Bancroft. My kind are decent human beings, Henry shot back, which means you do not qualify. Now get off my property before I make you leave. The men left, but not before making veiled threats about what might happen if Henry did not see reason. Ileana had watched the whole confrontation from inside the house, her face pale but determined. When Henry came back inside, she wrapped her arms around him. "I am sorry," she said. "I do not want to bring trouble to you." "You are not bringing trouble," Henry said, hugging her tightly. "They are choosing to make trouble. That is on them, not you, and I meant what I said out there. You are my wife, and I will defend you against anyone who tries to hurt you." "I know," Ileana said, "but be careful, Henry. Men like that, they do not give up easily." She was right, of course. Over the next few weeks, they experienced several incidents that seemed designed to intimidate or harass them. Someone cut down a section of fence, letting several head of cattle wander off. Someone shot at Henry from a distance when he was out checking the herd, though the bullet went wide and he could not identify the shooter. It was a campaign of low-level terrorism, and it put them both on edge. Henry reported the incidents to the sheriff in Fort Kearney, but the man was distinctly unsympathetic. "You made your bed, Bancroft," he said with a shrug. "Can't say I am surprised people are upset about you marrying an Indian. Maybe you should think about sending her back to the reservation where she belongs." "She belongs with me," Henry said coldly. "And if you will not do your job and protect citizens of this territory, then I will handle it myself." From that point on, Henry made sure he was armed whenever he left the house, and he taught Ileana to shoot both his rifle and his pistol. She proved to be a quick study, her hand steady and her aim true. It gave him some comfort to know that she could defend herself if necessary. But the harassment stopped as suddenly as it had started. Henry suspected that whoever had been behind it had gotten bored or decided it was not worth the risk, but he remained vigilant. He would not let down his guard where Ileana's safety was concerned. As autumn arrived and the leaves began to turn, Ileana shared news that filled Henry with a joy so intense he thought he might burst. She was pregnant. They were going to have a baby. Henry swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to put her down. "We are having a baby," he kept repeating as though saying it would make it more real. "Ileana, we are going to be parents." "Yes," she said, her eyes shining with happy tears. "In the spring, around April or May, I think." Henry placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one," he said softly. "Your mother and I cannot wait to meet you." The pregnancy was not easy. Ileana suffered from sickness in the early months, and Henry did his best to take care of her, preparing bland foods that would not upset her stomach and handling more of the heavy work around the ranch. But Ileana was strong and determined, and as the months passed and her belly grew round with their child, she seemed to bloom with health and vitality. They spent the long winter evenings preparing for the baby's arrival. Henry built a cradle from oak wood, sanding it until it was smooth as glass and carving small designs into the headboard. Ileana sewed tiny clothes and blankets, using fabric Henry purchased on a trip to Fort Kearney. They argued good-naturedly about names, with Henry favoring strong English names and Ileana wanting to incorporate Apache traditions. "What about Nathaniel if it is a boy?" Henry suggested one evening. "We could call him Nate for short." "I like it," Ileana said, her hands resting on her belly. "And if it is a girl, I would like to name her after my mother. Her name was Elena." "Elena," Henry repeated, testing the sound of it. "That is beautiful. Elena Bancroft." "Or Nathaniel Bancroft," Ileana said with a smile. "Either way, our child will be loved." "More than they can possibly imagine," Henry agreed, leaning over to kiss her. The winter was harsh that year, with heavy snows and bitter cold. Henry worked himself ragged, keeping the cattle fed and the house warm, but he never complained. Everything he did for his growing family. Ileana helped as much as her pregnancy would allow, cooking meals and mending clothes and keeping their home comfortable and welcoming. In early March, when the snow was beginning to melt and the first hints of spring were appearing, Henry made another trip to Fort Kearny to buy supplies they would need for the baby's birth. He was loading sacks of flour and oats onto his wagon when he heard someone call his name. Henry turned to find a man approaching him, tall and lean with graying hair and a weathered face. It took Henry a moment to recognize him as James Burton, a rancher who lived about 20 miles south of Henry's place. "Burton," Henry said with a nod. "What can I do for you?" "I wanted to apologize," Burton said, surprising Henry. "I was one of the men who came to your place last summer. I said some things I should not have said." "Yes, you did," Henry said coolly. "I was wrong," Burton continued. "I let fear and prejudice cloud my judgment. I have been thinking about it a lot over these months, about what I said and why I said it. The truth is, I was scared. Scared of change, scared of things being different than they were when I was young. But that is no excuse for treating you or your wife poorly." Henry studied the older man, trying to gauge his sincerity. "What changed your mind, my daughter?" Burton said with a rueful smile. "She read me the riot act when she heard what I had done, told me I was acting like a bigoted fool, that I should be ashamed of myself. She was right. So I am here to say I am sorry, and if there is anything I can do to make amends, you just say the word." Henry felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. "I appreciate that," he said. "It takes courage to admit when you are wrong." "I figure the world has enough hate in it without me adding to it," Burton said. "You and your wife, you are just trying to live your lives and be happy. That is something worth supporting, not tearing down." They shook hands, and Henry felt a small measure of hope. If Burton could change his mind, maybe others could too. Maybe, slowly, things could get better. When Henry returned home and told Ileana about the encounter, she smiled. "See," she said, "not everyone is against us. Some people can learn and grow." "You are right," Henry said, pulling her into a gentle embrace. "And we will keep being ourselves, keep living our lives with integrity. Eventually, people will see that we are not a threat or something to be feared. We are just a family." 3 weeks later, on a cool April morning when the wildflowers were just beginning to bloom, Ileana went into labor. Henry had been expecting it, had prepared as best he could, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality of watching his wife in pain and being unable to do much to help. He boiled water, brought clean sheets, held Ileana's hand and whispered encouragements as the hours dragged on. Labor was long and difficult, and more than once Henry felt genuine fear that something would go wrong. But Ileana was strong, stronger than anyone he had ever known, and she fought through the pain with a determination that awed him. Finally, as the sun was setting and painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, their child was born. A boy, healthy and squalling, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would eventually settle into the same deep brown as his mother's. "Nathaniel," Ileana breathed, cradling their son against her chest. "Our Nathaniel." Henry could not speak. He was crying, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his wife and son, at this perfect little family they had created. He reached out with a trembling hand to touch the baby's tiny fist, and Nathaniel immediately grasped his finger with surprising strength. "Hello, son," Henry managed to choke out. "Welcome to the world." The next few months were a blur of sleepless nights and constant worry. Nathaniel was a healthy baby, but he was also demanding, needing to be fed and changed and held around the clock. Henry and Ileana took turns walking the floor with him when he fussed, singing lullabies and telling stories until he finally settled. But even in the exhaustion, Henry had never been happier. Watching Ileana nurse their son, seeing the tender way she cradled him and kissed his forehead, made Henry's heart swell with love. And when Nathaniel looked up at him with those solemn dark eyes, Henry felt a connection so profound it took his breath away. This was his child, his legacy, proof that love could triumph over hate and prejudice. As Nathaniel grew, he became the center of their world. He was a happy baby, quick to smile and laugh, curious about everything around him. Henry would carry him out to the barn and introduce him to the horses, while Ileana would take him on walks around the property, pointing out birds and plants and teaching him the names of things in both English and Apache. Word of Nathaniel's birth spread, and to Henry's surprise, several neighbors came by to offer congratulations and bring gifts. Not everyone, certainly. There were still those who refused to acknowledge the Bancroft family or who made their disapproval known in subtle ways. But there were also those who seemed willing to accept them, who saw a young couple working hard to build a life and raise a child and respected that. James Burton came by one afternoon with a gift of smoked venison and a hand-carved toy horse for Nathaniel. "My wife made the venison," he said, handing the parcels to Ileana, "and I made the horse. Figured every boy needs a horse, even if he is too young to ride yet." "Thank you," Ileana said, genuine warmth in her voice. "This is very kind of you." "It is the least I can do," Burton said. "You folks need anything, you let me know, I mean that." After he left, Ileana turned to Henry with tears in her eyes. "I never thought I would have this again," she said. "A home, a family, friends. After what happened to my parents and brothers, I thought I would always be alone." "You will never be alone," Henry said, wrapping his arms around her and their son. "You have me, and you have Nathaniel, and you have a future full of possibilities. We are building something here, Ileana, something that will last." 2 years passed in what felt like the blink of an eye. Nathaniel grew into a lively toddler, running around the ranch on sturdy legs and getting into everything. He had his mother's dark hair and eyes but his father's smile, and he was equally comfortable speaking English, or the Apache words Ileana taught him. He loved the horses and the cattle, loved being outside in the sun and wind, loved hearing stories before bed. And then, in the spring when Nathaniel was 2 years old, Ileana discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. She continued to work alongside Henry, slowing down only in the final weeks before the birth. Their second child, a daughter they named Alina after Ileana's mother, was born on a warm June evening. She was smaller than Nathaniel had been, more delicate, with fine features and a cap of black hair. Nathaniel was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to hold her and touch her and help take care of her. "Gentle," Ileana would remind him, guiding his small hands as he stroked Alina's cheek. "She is very little. You have to be gentle." "I will protect her," Nathaniel declared with the seriousness only a 2-year-old could muster. "I am her big brother." Henry and Ileana exchanged amused glances over his head, but there was also pride in their eyes. They were raising their children to be strong and kind, to value family above all else. In a world that could be harsh and unforgiving, that was the greatest gift they could give. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Henry had expanded the herd to nearly 80 head of cattle, and he had hired a young man named Thomas to help with the work. Thomas was the son of a farmer who had fallen on hard times, and Henry had taken him on partly out of kindness and partly because he genuinely needed the help. Thomas was a hard worker and had no problem with Henry's marriage to Ileana, treating her with the same respect he would have given any rancher's wife. With Thomas's help, Henry was able to take on more ambitious projects. They built a second barn, repaired and expanded the corrals, and even started construction on an addition to the house. The extra rooms would be for the children as they grew, giving them space of their own. Life was good, better than Henry had ever dared hope. He would wake each morning to the sound of his children laughing, to the sight of his wife moving about the kitchen, and feel a contentment so deep it was almost physical. This was what he had been searching for all along, this sense of belonging and purpose. One evening in late summer, when Nathaniel was 4 and Alina was 2, the family sat on the porch watching the sunset. Nathaniel was playing with the wooden horse James Burton had given him years ago, making it gallop across the porch boards. Alina sat in Aliana's lap, her thumb in her mouth and her eyes already drooping with sleep. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if I had not found you that day?" Henry asked Aliana quietly. She turned to look at him, her expression thoughtful. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I think about how easily things could have been different. If you had not been tracking that buck, if you had taken a different path, if you had decided I was not worth the trouble. Any one of those things and I would not be here. I would not have this life, these children, you." "But I did find you," Henry said, reaching over to take her free hand. "And I will thank whatever power in the universe made that possible for the rest of my days." "I used to be so angry," Aliana said softly. "After my family was killed, after everything was taken from me, I was filled with rage. I wanted revenge. I wanted to make someone pay for what had happened. But then you found me, and you were kind when you had no reason to be. You saw me as a person, not as an enemy or a problem." And slowly the anger faded. "It is still there sometimes, a shadow in the back of my mind, but it does not control me anymore. You gave me something to live for again, Henry. You gave me hope." "You gave me the same thing," Henry said. "I did not even realize I was lonely until I met you. I had convinced myself that this solitary life was enough, that I did not need anyone else. But I was wrong. You and the children, you are everything to me. You are the reason I wake up in the morning and the reason I sleep peacefully at night." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the sky deepened from orange to purple to dark blue. Stars began to appear, one by one, like tiny diamonds scattered across velvet. "Papa," Nathaniel said suddenly, looking up from his toy, "when I grow up, can I be a rancher like you?" "You can be anything you want to be," Henry said. "But if you want to be a rancher, I would be honored to teach you everything I know." "And I will teach you the things my mother taught me," Aliana added, "about the land and the plants and the stories of our people." "Both peoples," Nathaniel said, and it was not a question but a statement of fact. "I am both." "Yes," Henry said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are both, and you should be proud of that. You come from 2 strong traditions, 2 ways of seeing the world. That makes you special, Nathaniel. Never let anyone tell you different." Nathaniel nodded solemnly and went back to playing with his horse, apparently satisfied with this answer. Henry met Aliana's eyes and saw his own emotions reflected there. Love and pride, and a fierce determination to protect their children from the ugliness of the world. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. A 3rd child arrived, another son they named William, and then a 4th, a daughter they named Rose. The house that had once seemed so empty was now filled to bursting with the sounds of children playing and laughing and occasionally fighting. Henry built more rooms, expanded the barn again, and hired additional hands to help manage the growing ranch. Nathaniel grew into a responsible young man who could ride and rope as well as any cowboy. He had his father's strong work ethic and his mother's intuitive understanding of the land. Alina was quieter, more studious, with a gift for healing that reminded Henry of his own mother. She would follow Ileana around, learning about herbs and medicines, absorbing everything her mother could teach her. William was the wild one, always getting into trouble, always pushing boundaries. But he had a good heart, and Henry knew that with time and guidance he would settle down. And little Rose, the baby of the family, was everyone's darling, sweet-tempered and affectionate, with a smile that could melt the hardest heart. The ranch had become one of the most successful in the area. Henry's reputation as a fair and honest man had grown, and even those who had initially disapproved of his marriage had come to respect what he had built. The Bancroft family was known for their hard work, their hospitality, and their willingness to help neighbors in need. When Nathaniel turned 18, Henry sat him down for a serious conversation. "The ranch will be yours someday," he told his son. "You and your brother and sisters will inherit everything your mother and I have built. But I want you to understand that this land, this life, it comes with responsibilities. You have to care for the land, treat it with respect. You have to care for the people who work here, treat them fairly. And most importantly, you have to remember that your strength comes from your family, from standing together." "I understand, Pa," Nathaniel said. "You and Ma have taught us well. We will honor what you have built here." Henry felt a swell of pride. His son had grown into a fine man, someone who would carry on the legacy he and Ileana had created. It was more than he had ever hoped for. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Henry took Ileana back to the place where he had first found her, to that ravine where she had lain wounded and dying. They stood at the edge, looking down at the spot where both their lives had changed forever. "I never thought I would come back here," Ileana said, holding tight to Henry's hand. "This place held so much pain for me, so much loss. But it was also the place where we found each other," Henry said. "Where our story began." "Yes," Ileana agreed, "and what a story it has been." They had faced prejudice and hardship, had struggled and worked and fought for every inch of happiness they had achieved, but they had done it together, and that had made all the difference. They had built a life, a family, a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. "I love you," Henry said, the same words he had spoken to her 2 decades ago, the same words he would continue to speak until his dying day. "I will always love you." "And I love you," Ileana said. "My heart, my partner, my home." They kissed there at the edge of the ravine, 2 people who had defied the odds and found something precious. Then they turned and walked back to their horses, ready to return to the ranch, to their children and grandchildren, to the life they had built together. The sun was setting as they rode home, painting the Nebraska sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and gold. Henry looked over at Ileana, at the woman who had changed his entire world, and felt nothing but gratitude. He had saved her life that day in the ravine, but in truth, she had saved his too. She had given him purpose and meaning, had shown him what true love looked like, had blessed him with a family beyond anything he had ever imagined. They reached the ranch just as darkness was falling, and the house glowed with welcoming lamplight. Their children and grandchildren were waiting inside, gathered for a celebration dinner in honor of the anniversary. As Henry and Ileana dismounted and walked hand in hand toward the house, they could hear laughter and music drifting through the open windows. "Home," Ileana said softly, and Henry heard all the wonder and contentment in that single word. "Home," he agreed, and together they stepped across the threshold into the warmth and love that awaited them. The years that followed were gentler, slower. Henry and Ileana gradually stepped back from the day-to-day running of the ranch, letting Nathaniel and William take on more responsibility. They spent their time with their grandchildren, teaching them the same lessons they had taught their own children, passing down stories and traditions and values. Nathaniel married a schoolteacher from Fort Kearney, a practical woman named Sarah who fit seamlessly into the family. They had 3 children of their own, and the ranch house echoed with even more laughter and noise. Alina chose not to marry, instead dedicating herself to healing work, traveling between homesteads and helping those who were sick or injured. William eventually married the daughter of James Burton, a spirited woman named Margaret, and they settled on a piece of land adjacent to the main ranch. And Rose, when she came of age, fell in love with a young lawyer from Omaha, and they built a life together in the growing city, though she visited the ranch often. Henry and Eliana watched with pride as their family grew and flourished. They had created something that would outlast them, a testament to the power of love and determination. On quiet evenings, they would sit on the porch just as they had done for decades, holding hands and watching the sunset, content in each other's presence. "You have any regrets?" Henry asked one such evening when they were both well into their 60s. Eliana thought about it for a long moment. "No," she said finally. "I regret the loss of my first family, of course. I will always carry that grief with me, but I do not regret anything that has happened since you found me. Every moment with you has been a gift, Henry. Every moment has been worth living." "I feel the same," Henry said. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Eliana Bancroft, the very best thing." They lived to see their great-grandchildren born, to see the ranch expand even further, to see the world around them change in ways both good and troubling. But through it all, their love remained constant, a steady flame that never flickered or dimmed. When Henry died at the age of 72, it was peacefully in his sleep, with Eliana beside him. She held his hand as he took his last breath, tears streaming down her face but also a smile on her lips, because she knew he had lived a full and happy life. She knew they had built something beautiful together, something that would endure. Eliana lived another 5 years without him, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, telling stories of the past, making sure the history of their love was never forgotten. She told them about the day Henry had found her in the ravine, about how he had cared for her despite the risks, about how they had fallen in love against all odds. She told them that love was the most powerful force in the world, that it could overcome hate and prejudice and fear, if only people were brave enough to choose it. When Eliana finally passed away at the age of 74, surrounded by family, her last words were Henry's name. They buried her beside him on a hillside overlooking the ranch, under a spreading oak tree they had planted together decades before. The marker reads simply, "Henry Bancroft and Eliana Bancroft, beloved parents and grandparents together forever." Their children and grandchildren continued to run the ranch for generations, keeping alive the values and traditions Henry and Eliana had established. The story of how they had met, how they had defied convention to be together, became a legend in the family, told and retold to each new generation. It was a reminder that love could transcend boundaries, that kindness and compassion mattered more than fear and prejudice, that 2 people from different worlds could create something beautiful together if they were willing to fight for it. The ranch prospered through the decades, adapting to changing times while maintaining its core identity. The Bancroft family became known not just for their success in ranching, but for their integrity, their generosity, and their commitment to treating all people with respect regardless of their background. It was a legacy that Henry and Eliana would have been proud of, proof that their love had changed not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone who came after them. And on quiet evenings, when the sun set over the Nebraska hills and painted the sky in brilliant colors, members of the Bancroft family would sometimes stand on that hillside where Henry and Eliana were buried and remember the story of the cowboy who found a wounded Apache woman and lost his heart to her forever. It was a story of courage and compassion, of love that overcame impossible odds, of two souls who found each other in the wilderness and built a life together that would stand the test of time. The oak tree continued to grow, its branches spreading wide and strong, providing shade and shelter just as Henry and Eliana had provided for their family. Birds nested in its branches, and in the spring wildflowers bloomed around its trunk. It was a living memorial to their love, a symbol of how something beautiful and enduring could grow from even the most painful beginnings. The ranch itself became a place of pilgrimage for some, a reminder that the Old West had not just been about violence and conflict, but also about people from different backgrounds coming together, finding common ground, building lives and families and communities. Henry and Eliana's story was one of thousands that had played out across the frontier, stories of unlikely love and unexpected friendship, of barriers broken down and prejudices overcome. Their great-great-grandchildren would eventually hear the story, would visit the graves and touch the old oak tree, and try to imagine what it must have been like in those early days. They would look at the ranch that had started as a small homestead and grown into a thriving enterprise, and they would understand that it all began with one man's decision to save a woman's life, to see her as a person rather than an enemy, to open his heart to love even when the world told him it was wrong. And perhaps in their own lives, they would remember that lesson. They would remember that compassion and kindness mattered, that love was worth fighting for, that the divisions that seemed so insurmountable could be bridged if people were willing to try. They would remember Henry and Eliana, and they would strive to live up to the example they had set, to build a world where love could flourish regardless of race or background or circumstance. The sun continued to rise and set over the ranch, seasons changed, years passed into decades and decades into centuries, but the story remained. It was preserved in family journals and letters, in photographs and memories, in the very land itself. The story of the cowboy and the Apache woman, of a love that had seemed impossible but had proved to be unbreakable, of a legacy that would never be forgotten. Henry and Eliana had found each other in a moment of darkness and desperation, and from that moment, they had built a life filled with light and love and purpose. They had faced opposition and hardship, had weathered storms both literal and figurative, had worked harder than most people could imagine. But they had done it together, hand in hand, heart to heart, and that had made all the difference. Their love story was not just their own. It belonged to their children and grandchildren and all who came after, a testament to what was possible when people chose love over fear, when they saw the humanity in those who were different from themselves, when they had the courage to defy convention and follow their hearts. It was a story that deserved to be remembered, to be celebrated, to be passed down through the generations as a reminder of the best that humanity could be. And so it was, year after year, generation after generation, the story lived on. The ranch remained in the family, the oak tree continued to grow, and the legacy of Henry and Eliana Bancroft endured, a beacon of hope and love in a world that too often forgot the power of both. Their story had begun in a ravine in Nebraska Territory in 1878, when a cowboy found a wounded woman and made a choice that would change both their lives forever. It was a choice that resonated through time, a choice that proved love could conquer even the deepest divides, a choice that created a legacy of hope and healing that would never die.